Welcome, everyone. I see we're still, some people are still coming in, but I think it's good to start. Otherwise, yeah, we won't be able to finish within the time limit. I just want to welcome everyone to this learning event, and on behalf of CARE Netherlands as well as CARE South Sudan, we're very thrilled to have you all on this call. And we're very excited to be sharing some findings, some learning from our Addressing Root Causes program in South Sudan, implemented in Young Life State. Yeah, we're very excited to be joined by many peer organizations as well as some representatives from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And maybe some independent consultants, knowledge institutes as well. Yeah, so very excited to have you all on board. And I want to specifically introduce to you our facilitator for today, who is Sarah Ward, independent consultant. And she is a post-conflict and post-disaster market systems specialist, has also been involved in this research, this particular research in South Sudan, as an independent reviewer for the study, giving advice on scoping and such. So I would like to hand over to Sarah to walk us through the agenda and the rest of this session.
Thank you, Berlinda. Hello, everybody. I see some folks already introducing themselves in the chat, and I'd like to encourage you to keep doing that. I see some old colleagues and some familiar names on this list, so it's good to have you. And for those who are either new to this space or new to this research, very warm welcome to you. We are going to have a pretty active session today. It's not a long session. The webinar is only about an hour and a half. But hopefully we'll have a good opportunity for all of us to chat and talk and discuss some of these findings. What I'd like to do now is to do two things. And the first thing is to run through the agenda together so we understand what we're going to be doing over the next hour and a half. And the second thing is going to be thinking about framing this discussion together. And where does this discussion, where does this new learning sit in some of the research and learning that we've already done. So the first thing I'd like to do, as these slides come up, is go through the agenda and introduce some of our speakers. So if we can go to the slide of our speakers, here we all are. This is us. So here's me with a better hairstyle. And there is Angeline looking fantastic. And here's Katie, and there's Malish. And these will be our primary speakers for today. And I'll talk us through who they all are. As I've mentioned, I am an independent consultant who's been involved in this for a while. Angeline is the global sector lead of livelihoods with World Vision and has been working with savings groups and thinking about and promoting and being passionate about and learning the value of savings groups across all of World Vision International's programming. Katie Whipke is now the study author and now an independent consultant, but has had strong ties to CARE and so knows this space very well within CARE and CARE Netherlands and led all of the research on the ground working with the South Sudan team. And Malish is the Deputy Country Director of Programs with CARE South Sudan and was directly involved in this learning as well as in the program that they are learning about. So they have, so Malish is an important member of this study team as well as being an important member of this webinar, because he's really going to be able to talk us through what this learning means, which, as we know, is some of the most important parts of when we learn and research. What does it mean to us? What does it mean on the ground? What does it mean to our work going forward? So these are the people that we have with us. And in this agenda, you've just been welcomed by Berlinda. Thank you, Berlinda, from CARE Netherlands. And here am I framing the issue, which I will do in just a moment. And then we'll go into an actual presentation from Katie about these study findings. And that will be really digging into and learning about what's happening in the study, what we learned, what the key points were. It'll talk through the methodology as well. Then we'll have a brief Q&A. And this Q&A, what I'd like to do for everyone is I'd like to ask you to put your questions into the chat. So as you're listening to Katie, as you're hearing what the thoughts are, what the information is, if there are points of clarification you need, if there are technical questions about the study itself, those are some questions that we'll answer with Katie very immediately after the presentation. But if some of the questions are more technical, more broad-ranging, more about the implications of the study, what it means for you, what challenges you may or may not see reflected in the study and this learning, those are questions that we'll hold and we'll discuss in our breakout rooms. After Katie's presentation, we'll have Malish come, and Malish will be giving some perspective from South Sudan about what this learning does mean to their programming. And then we'll have some reflections from Angie at World Vision. And it's really because it's important for all of us to recognize we sometimes do our work in a little silo, and we do our research about one particular project, and then we discuss it with each other, and then we apply, hopefully, some of those lessons to the project we learned about. But sometimes we forget that there are hundreds of other organizations out there, oftentimes globally, looking at similar issues. And these knowledge platforms that we're currently using right now, and the knowledge sharing groups that are helping us do this, allow us to bring in other people and allow us to bring in other perspectives. And so that's what Angie is going to help us with, is thinking about, from an organization that is looking at similar issues, but was not involved in this research, what could this research mean for them? And so you all may be in that similar situation as well, thinking to yourself as you listen to these findings, what does this mean for me? And finally, that's what we're going to address together in our breakout discussions. We will have facilitated breakout discussions. You'll be randomly assigned a room, and we'll have jam boards that we can use and look at to decide, what does this mean for us? Or what are some challenges that we didn't see? We heard the lessons, but we can anticipate there will be challenges in our own work, in our own learning, in our own implementation that we didn't see brought up or addressed. What might some of those be? And there are 3 questions actually, which you'll see in the breakout rooms, and we'll have a facilitated discussion where you will have a chance to join a Jamboard. We've been doing this a long time. I'm sure many of you have used the Jamboard function before. So you'll have the chance to join a Jamboard and put your thoughts and your information and your vision for what this means out onto those Jamboards and discuss together. And then finally, we'll come together and Berlinda will close us as she's opened us and talk a little bit about where this information might lead. So that's the journey we're going to go on together today. And I hope that you're ready for that. There will be lots of opportunities, especially in the breakout rooms, for you to reflect on what this information means. I'm going to do just a 2 or 3 minute reflection myself, just to kick us off before I hand it over to Katie so we can learn more about the details of the study. So for those of you who know me, and I see many of you here I do know, but many I haven't met yet. But I've been working in this space for about over 20 years now, really. And the space, when I say this space, what I mean is very specifically working with savings groups in emergencies. Back in the 2000s, when I was in Sierra Leone, right after the conflict, looking at how savings groups that started in the refugee camps in Guinea and then continued during the return in Sierra Leone and Liberia were an important part of my work. Looking at, savings groups beginning now in places where refugees are, like Jordan and Turkey, and this sort of it's sort of a new technology, especially in Jordan, that they're looking at and what that means for these communities. We have long known that VSLAs create increased trust, that they build relationships, that they establish business skills, that they allow income generating opportunities. We've long known that these things work and happen and are important. We have recently been able to understand more clearly how they shift gender roles and can change gender norms. And CARE and World Vision, and many of you on this call have been doing a lot of really good work, learning more about that and figuring out what are the important parts. We have recognized that just saving and borrowing will not create shifts in gender norms. We have recognized that there needs to be further integration of gender change tools with VSLAs for that to be solidified. But what we do know is that when that happens, when VSLAs work in concert with other activities or in concert with other reinforcements, that integration, new social and negotiation skills, leadership opportunities, and community weight, community voice can all happen as VSLAs happen. And VSLAs reinforce all of those important things. But what we have realized is that without that mutual reinforcing connection, without having both the VSLA in its pure essential form being a lending and borrowing community structure, as well as these other reinforcing pieces around leadership and trust and community and social cohesion, then we don't fully realize what VSLAs can do. And so what this research is really, where it sits in that learning, is figuring out how does peace building and social cohesion become reinforced by the VSLA model, and how does the VSLA model reinforce, or does it, peace building and social cohesion. And so on that note, I'd like to hand over to Katie, the author of the study, to walk us through what they learned in South Sudan and some interesting points and what that might mean for us going forward. So Katie, I'll hand it over to you. I'll just remind everybody that as questions arise, please do pop them into the chat box. We'll be monitoring that as Katie is going through her presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you for framing the issue so nicely for us so we can get a good understanding to get started on this study. So wonderful to be here. Great to see so many familiar faces and new ones too. I hope that this next little bit of time that we're going to spend together is going to be meaningful for you. So let me actually just jump right in so we have the most amount of time possible at the end to talk more. What this study was looking to answer is the question that you see on your screen. But in brief, we're really trying to understand VSLAs. Do they affect social cohesion? And how and why? And this is what we're trying to get a better understanding of through this study. To get that answer, what we did was we looked at 4 counties in South Sudan. We spoke in focus groups with 120 VSLA members, and we made sure to break that down by different groups. We spoke with men and women of different age categories. And then we also put a big focus on speaking with community leaders. And with these community leaders, we were looking at a variety of different types. We had 4 different types of community leaders that we were targeting. And then we reached out to some civil society organizations. Maybe some of you were able to speak with us, but we focused around the different counties. So we pulled all of these different views and perspectives together to try to determine how men and women's participation of these different age groups has some sort of impact on social cohesion in South Sudan. Now, I can give you the bottom line right up front. What we saw is, yeah, VSLAs do have some role in social cohesion. We saw it pretty clearly through the findings, but what that role is, how it looks in different contexts, and the different factors that surround the VSLA also have a major role. So let me just say that right up front. You can't just take a VSLA and suddenly there's peace and social cohesion. I think we know that already, but this study confirms that. But what it does find is that there are moments where VSLAs have a role in positively impacting social cohesion. Indeed, what we heard from community leaders is that since VSLAs entered their community, nearly all of them said that their community had changed for the better. They were saying things like, people can pay school fees, there's less struggle. These are economic indicators, but then they were saying But that means that there's been less need for people to engage in any kind of conflict. So what we saw, very, very, very simply, just make it as simple as possible, when people are able to improve their financial status, their economic status, through the means of a VSLA, they have a lower need to engage in conflict. So we see greater peace building outcomes. And this is just the high level picture. Let me tell you a little bit more detail about what that means and how it is something different for different people. Okay, so why? Why are we seeing this outcome about social cohesion in VSLAs? There are a few reasons. I'm really trying to distill it down as simple as possible, but the two main reasons I'll explain first are the economic incentive and the resilience incentive. So we see this increased trust, as Sarah so wonderfully framed for us through VSLAs, which is wonderful. But what we see that is actually there's this economic incentive to trust each other and to cooperate with each other. VSLA members told us that they are trusting people from other tribes more, especially when engaging in economic activities. They said very simply, you know, you have to trust each other because they want to buy what I'm selling and I want to buy what they're selling. So you have to trust that you're going to be able to do that together. And in order to make money, you know, you can't be in conflict with each other. So they had that very simple incentive to maintain the peace. And then also the income generating activities that VSLAs have been the catalyst to create. Those are actually, what we're seeing is more people are engaging in external trade relationships. So sometimes that's trade that's happening within one geographic community, but between different tribal communities, or it could be trade between different geographic communities within the same tribal community, or even different tribal communities and different geographic communities. Through this study, we were actually able to trace at least 3 new trading routes that emerged between groups that never were speaking really before as a result of VSLA activities. So yeah, this was a really important finding for us. The other big reason that we saw why is there's this resilience incentive. And most people know, I would say in this room, about the social fund that VSLAs run. Basically, this is a social insurance fund that members contribute a small amount to, and then in case of emergency, they're able to utilize that fund. These are things like medical bills and school fees, things like that. And especially during what's been a really hard time in South Sudan, both because of COVID-19, but also very, very severe flooding. We saw a huge need for that social fund, particularly for medical bills. And people said that has de-escalated the tensions in the community. So there's an existing pot of money people can turn to rather than having this need to engage in things like theft or cattle raiding, things that may cause violence and criminal activity. And one thing that's very, very interesting that we didn't get into detail in this study because we only just found it in this study, so maybe I'll reach out to all of you to research this into the future. When we looked at the numbers of the VSLAs, when there was very extreme flooding, we actually lost almost half of the VSLAs because of intense displacement that happened in South Sudan in 2020. We found that women increased, the percentage of women in VSLAs increased. So in other words, in these extreme circumstances, men were more likely to leave the VSLA than women were. This could be because of different roles in the community, or it could be the nature of the VSLA that there's this resilience incentive, especially for women in times of extreme hardship. But this, we need more examination, I would say. But let me continue on. At a very high level, we found some factors that were key in whether social cohesion resulted through the VSLAs. Some of them were community factors, and some of them were factors with the VSLA themselves, and the final is with the members. Let me start with the community factors. So you can see on the screen, I just put 4 quick bullets here, but I'll just explain a couple of them in brief for the sake of time. one of the big community factors was the presence of other community groups. What we found is about 3/4 of the VSLA respondents are members in other community groups. So we're seeing a pretty saturated ecosystem of community groups. It's actually the women who are very likely to be in another group. Nearly 100% of them were in another group. But the girls, maybe only just about over half were in another group. So we see big differences depending on age, especially. And these community groups influence the VSLA, and the VSLA also influence these groups from what we heard. So for example, people who were in certain groups were convinced by that other group to join a VSLA because of the financial opportunity it created. And then vice versa. In the VSLA, people were incentivized to join other community groups in order to better promote their businesses and their income generating activities. So we see that it's really important to recognize this overlap in the community. And this means that they're, particularly with the VSLA, interacting with people who are different from their normal community groups. They're using the VSLA as a way to reach more people. And for people who are maybe not used to sitting together to come together. We heard a lot of people tell us, it was the very first time ever through the VSLA that we were able to get people to sit together because they have this shared incentive to sit together. And that was really a big, remarkable statement that kept coming up over and over. Another thing that was really important that we found related to the community is that people needed to have a safe space. And that when we're studying social cohesion, of course that's critical, but what we found these safe spaces to be is things like the top two were the churches and the markets. And what those meant for social cohesion is that at the market, people had an incentive to get along, to work with people who were different than them, to be able to share and sell their goods, and to buy goods. And then at the church, people said, this isn't just a place for worship for a lot of these people. It's a safe space where they can learn what's happening across different community divides. It was a place where they're sharing information with each other. VSLA members were using it as a way to promote their business activities, but also to learn from other communities what was needed and to identify where those gaps are in the community for them to capitalize and become entrepreneurial about them. The last thing that I'll share briefly is the last point on influential leaders. When we talked to the community leaders, actually a third of them were VSLA members themselves. And we found that while these leaders found VSLAs to be important economically, they weren't using the VSLA yet as a space to build social cohesion. But they said they were using it, particularly using things like the social fund, to be able to call people together. So they used the VSLA to call a meeting. One female leader, she told us that she used it as a way to do dike construction and bring the community together, disparate members of the community to build something. I'm not sure if somebody had a question or if I should continue on. Yeah, continue, okay. The next slide I want to talk about is the VSLA itself and the structure of the VSLA and how that was a factor that influenced social cohesion. So one of those things is the rules that exist within a VSLA. By nature, VSLAs are a conflict reducing entity because they have a rule that members can't engage in conflict. Otherwise, there's a risk that they're going to be kicked out of the group. So people have that incentive in the VSLA structure to reduce the amount of conflict and violence in their own lives because they don't want to risk losing their membership. There are also informal rules that are part of all VSLAs, things like, members can't engage in violence or alcoholism. People spoke about those quite clearly. So this relates to the second point, which there's already a pretty high trust that's built into the group itself because members are selecting other members. So this has a lot of wonderful benefits in that the VSLA members can trust each other and work together. It's vital for being able to share money that you can trust with each other. However, it does create a bit more of a similarity of the members. So when asked about similarities and differences in the membership, VSLA members overwhelmingly said that they felt they were all very similar, that they shared most of the same characteristics with each other. So in some sense, maybe this is great because there's a lot of trust, but in another sense, it may already be creating some, supporting some divides that already exist. For example, in one community in Pibor, there's a cultural norm that people have strong associations with their age group. So what we heard from members is that they really trust each other within the group. And this is because they're already, there's this trust built in within the age group. But the VSLA isn't making them trust people outside their group more. And that's because the members are already pretty similar. You know, it's already the same divide that exists, and they're building the VSLA groups around those divides. So this is a really important finding for us to determine, how do you work with that? How do you not lose the structure and the trust by members selecting each other, but making sure that homogeneous selection process isn't deepening already existing divides. For the sake of time, I'm going to continue on. I hope you will refer to the study for more details on these other factors. But the last thing I want to spend a little bit of time on about the enabling factors of VSLAs is through the VSLA, and this is something Sarah set us up with at the beginning. We know that VSLAs help build trust, but one thing that we thought was so important that we kept hearing is that people said, because they were able to sit together in a VSLA, they decreased the amount of negative perceptions they had about people that they had had before. So they're sitting together, they have to trust each other through this economic incentive, and they're starting to see, oh, maybe people aren't so different. Maybe I don't need to have this negative perception. Some people said it decreased the tribalism. So what we were finding quite clearly is that being able to do that and see that they could trust each other and depend on each other, reduce some of those negative perceptions, even created friendships. People were saying, women especially were saying that they were creating more friendships with people from different communities, whether that's geographic or ethnic. Overwhelmingly, people said that their cross-community interactions increased. 88% of people said that. And this is really interesting because they've overwhelmingly found it positive. This is the VSLA members. I want to highlight one interesting thing that came out through the study very briefly, is that with the ARC program, which was the study was based around the ARC program, addressing root causes, the baseline and the midterm evaluation for that program, they found that from baseline to midterm, interactions increased, but the level of trust didn't. And this is across all different people, not just VSLA members. But when we look at this study in particular of just VSLA members, actually the trust did increase with interaction. So maybe there's something there that's, yes, interacting more can be really beneficial, but it really matters why you're interacting. And maybe VSLAs are a really good entry point to increase trust through interactions rather than to just increase interactions themselves. Okay, let me continue. The two groups that we found the most interesting and significant changes as a result of VSLAs were for women over the age of 35 and for young men between the ages of 18 to 34. So let me highlight some of the things we saw for women in particular, because their changes were quite significant. And Sarah hinted at this at the beginning with the shifts in gender norms. And we did find that as well. Gender norms were definitely shifting for the women in South Sudan who were part of VSLAs. Actually, their economic empowerment is triggering their improved status in their own community. People are starting to see them not just as the women in the community, they're seeing them as leaders, as entrepreneurs, as mobilizers. These are the roles that women are creating for themselves, but people are overwhelmingly recognizing them for. That is largely because they now have the financial strength to be recognized for it. And women are much more confident. Everyone is saying that it has increased their confidence, which enables them to play these bigger roles. In fact, some people told us that they thought women were better peace agents than men. They thought women were better able to bridge those divides than men were. And that was a really important thing to hear. And one thing that was quite interesting is overwhelmingly people perceived that the different income generating activities were very different for men and women. They say women do very different activities than men. Women are doing lighter activities, men are doing the heavier activities. But when we actually asked them, so what are the activities that each group is doing? We heard a lot of the same things. So in reality, we're hearing that men and women are actually doing a lot of the same income generating activities, but overwhelmingly they believe that they're different. So it was very noteworthy to hear that sometimes these perceptions about gender roles and different activities are maybe different than the reality. And I want to introduce you to Mrs. Mary here. She actually was one of the first VSLA members back when the program started. She started her own VSLA. She mobilized 10 women in her community because her husband died and she needed to come up with a way to feed and take care of her children. So she heard about the VSLAs, mobilized women, and she was able to start a tea making business quite successfully. And she told us that before there were VSLAs in her community, she didn't think there was any type of social cohesion. But particularly for women, since the emergence of VSLAs, women were able to start socializing together and having dialogues together. And she went so far as to thinking maybe there are friendships that are now built. So this is just one example important that she was able to share with us. Next, I'll highlight for young men. We're reaching the end of the presentation here, so I hope you're still with me. For young men, we had a lot of important findings for them as well. And this is largely because the traditional role for young men in South Sudan is to be the leaders of the conflict and violence, really. They're the ones who are on the front line. They're able to take that role in whenever there's conflict that's emerging, they're the first ones to go out. And that role is important to them in that it's important to the community that they have this leadership role. So what we heard from young men is those who are getting, especially those who are receiving more education and more opportunity for diversifying the income generating activities that they do, they're actually becoming more involved in peace processes instead of conflict because they see that it's better for their economic opportunity. We heard some of these young men used to be cattle raiders, now they're cattle traders, and they're seeing that they can have a lot more financial benefits personally. Some of the negative things we heard is people say, well, they're not respecting their parents and doing what their parents say anymore, and that's not good for the community. But some of the young men say having other options for their IGAs rather than what their parents are asking them to do has made them entrepreneurs and still given them a very important role in the community as leaders, both as entrepreneurs and leaders in the peace process. So they can maintain that important status in the community that was key for them. And I'll introduce you to one of the young men. Again, he was one of the first VSLA members in the ARC program. And he told us a story and an example of how he was able to put his skills to action. He was telling a story about how there were the cattle groups were in the negotiating over water and land. They needed to figure out where the cattle needed to be grazed. And one group wanted to put their cattle on the highlands. And the other group said, no, I do, because this is better land for the cattle to graze. And he saw that this conflict was emerging between where the cattle would graze, the highland or the lowland. So people went back and were starting to get their guns and to mobilize to engage in a lot of violence, according to him. And he said he was able to step back and get people to pause, hold a meeting, and he successfully negotiated with these two different groups from different communities that they would share the highland. So they've worked out a schedule of when they would share the highland for grazing and lowland. And he was able to use that with the skills he gained through the VSLA and the peace building skills he garnered through the trainings. So yeah, that was one tangible example of violence that was stopped, thankfully. So let me just sum up briefly. What we found here is VSLAs are really positive for improving social cohesion for the two main reasons. The first being what they do for an individual. They strengthen their own personal agency and they give them a role in the community as an entrepreneur and as a leader. And then second, it reduces the impetus for conflict because people's economic status is improved. They don't need to engage in activities that may be violent because they have other means for that, for that economic need that they have. They have more financial stability. It's another avenue. So in other words, VSLAs can be a bit of an icebreaker for people to meet each other from different communities that wouldn't have met before and get trust, but also that financial gain that we get through VSLAs is key. So what we know is that VSLAs can't operate alone. They have to work in an ecosystem of lots of other things like other community groups, things like having trainings that support the needs of the community. And importantly, there's context that matters. So like I mentioned a bit earlier, when the severe flooding happened, we lost almost half of the VSLAs. So VSLAs can be really key for resilience, but that's in more smaller cases. So VSLAs are fantastic for that. But when things get severe, really severe, where the entire community is affected, from what we understand through this study, VSLAs really need some extra support. That they can't operate by themselves there. So I will leave you with just a couple of the recommendations in the study. There are quite a few more with more detail, but just to highlight very briefly, one of the main recommendations for the donors is to take on a stronger advocacy role, particularly of policies that support these findings, things like promoting education and how that, especially for women and young people, policies that support financial opportunities and the institutionalization of VSLAs. We found in some countries that have institutionalized VSLAs in their economic plans and community development plans, that's been highly beneficial for people's access and the success of those VSLAs. And just a couple of quick points of recommendations for practitioners. One is to establish VSLA cooperative associations, and we recommend that you start with finding the VSLAs who are already linking with each other through trade routes in different communities and building upon those into associations so they may have more sway and more influence to make bigger changes in markets, for example. Another is to really focus on young men. So we saw the importance of what VSLAs mean to young men and how that can help reduce conflict when men have another outlet for economic opportunity. Third, to focus on intra-community social cohesion through diversifying VSLAs. Really important we don't lose those trust factors that is important for VSLAs to operate. However, recognizing that sometimes VSLAs can be formed along the same divides that already exist in the community and making sure we try to mitigate that as much as possible. And finally, identifying and utilizing those safe spaces. So when people feel safer, places like churches and markets, they're more likely to interact in a way that continues to build on this idea of trust and comfort. So there are many, like I said, many more findings, many more recommendations in the study, but I hope this gives you a quick overview. And I will turn it back over to Sarah to wrap us up.
Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you to everybody who's been putting the questions in the chat. I have been keeping track of them. As you see me doing this, what I'm doing right there is writing down your questions. So I think that one of the things I'd like to do is remind us that this study was really focused very much on thinking about social cohesion and thinking about how VSLAs in this context of South Sudan over a relatively long period of time. As you'll notice, one of the case studies or one of the little examples that we heard had somebody who had been engaged within a 5-year time frame. So over the long term, over this project, how social cohesion and peace building was affected by the VSLAs. And what I want to point out is a lot of the questions that we have coming up in the question in the chat are around some of the functionalities of savings groups how do VSLAs function? How do members choose which activities to engage in when they do take a loan from their VSLA? How do they decide whether to run a tea shop or do something else? How are they affected by crisis? How are they affected by flooding? How are they affected by conflict? How do they adjust to that? And then there was a number of different questions around how VSLAs form. How do group members decide to become group members? Do they make decisions based on each other's age? Do they make decisions based on each other's gender? Do programs decide how that works? And I think a lot of those questions are going to be really important to discuss and think through in our breakout rooms. So the first question I just like to bring out to Katie, which was one which was very specifically around the technical study, is Katie, Kirsten asked, how did you recruit your focus group participants and what was the process of collecting the information? So, and I think this is really a question on how was this study put together? Was it remotely collected? How did the process work? So if you can just give a quick answer on that, that will be really helpful for Kirsten.
Yeah, so I think in this time, everyone's used to doing research during COVID. Things are a little bit more flexible, I think, than they used to be because of the different safety procedures. So when we pulled together the participants for the study, this was led by the teams in CARE South Sudan and HDC, which is a partner of CARE for the ARC program. And what we did was we created a very strict sampling guideline over the genders and the ages and the locations that we were aiming to reach. And then we reached out to the VSLAs in those locations, for the VSLAs who had members of those different genders and age groups in the specific locations. And it was a bit of a snowball sample, I guess you could say, where something, my screen, I hope you can still see me. My screen just went off. Yeah, okay. So it was a little bit of a snowball sampling in that they were offered the opportunity to anyone who was in the VSLA, and the members were able to come together into focus groups. And we needed to limit the size of the focus groups to allow for things like safe social distancing and taking extra measures for making sure that everybody was safe and all the kind of personal hygiene measures were taken. So we had small focus groups in these specific locations based purely on the people who were interested in participating. So it is important to notice that there are some limitations to the findings of the study based on that, in that the people who were members of the savings group who wanted to participate were the ones who were speaking to us. And these are also people who are involved with the ARC program. So we need to understand that these findings may not be generalizable to everybody who's not involved in the ARC program, but because the study is related to those VSLAs, it is still relevant for the findings of the study. And what we found, and what we know through ARC, is that the people who are part of VSLAs in these communities, it's a lot. VSLAs have become a huge part of the community. So yeah, we're getting a pretty good understanding of what most people in the community think.
Thank
I hope
you,
that
Katie.
answers.
Yes, I think it absolutely does. Kirsten, I hope that answers your question. It may have even given you more information than you had asked for, so that's fantastic. As I've said, and the questions keep coming into the chat, and I can sort of characterize these questions into three sort of main groups. Is the first question group that we're seeing here, questions sort of from Regina, questions from Kingsley, questions from Sarah and Samira, question from Tabale. I hope I haven't murdered your name, Tabale, and Florence, are really questions around how do VSLAs work? How do VSLAs work in conflict? How do VSLAs work in crisis? And I think one of the things that is interesting to me, and I'll just let everybody know this quickly, is that there's a lot of learning going on and happening right now around VSLAs in conflict. How do they work? How do they adapt? How do their functions change? One of the speakers we'll hear from shortly, Angie, is involved in a group, and we have some folks in the breakout rooms who are also involved in groups that are doing some very specific learning around how do VSLAs adjust and function in conflict and crisis. And What we can't do, I think, at this moment is answer those questions. Those are very broad questions that have a lot of pieces and moving parts. So I don't think this forum and this study is in a position to spend time providing answers on that. What it can do, and what I encourage you to do, is look through the study to understand a little bit more about how, if VSLAs are working in a community and have been for many, many years, as they have been in this project in South Sudan, what effects does it have on a community's ability to manage conflict, internal conflict and external conflict in relationships? And are there social cohesion? Do they bank social cohesion? Do they become more cohesive and able to handle these conflicts, these crises, the floods, the intercommunity crisis that they're engaging in? Do they have a better capacity to deal with that in a positive way? What I'd like to do now is, oh, go ahead, Katie.
Sorry, just to highlight, we were asking members specifically about how they were able to reach each other through 3 types of severe circumstances that they were facing in those communities, which is COVID-19, the severe flooding, and increased violence by some specific groups. And we actually were able to get some answers about adaptations that they made. So while it is not a study about that, I do encourage you to look. So just as an example, because of when extreme violence erupted in some areas, members told us that friends actually supported each other with the IGAs, so that friends would bring on other friends to help each other with income generating activities. That's one adaptation that was being made. And then for COVID-19, for example, women were sending money with other women so they wouldn't be meeting in a large group. So they would just take turns who would go and meet, and they would send their money with each other. And they decided to shift some of their activities, for example, into making masks that they could sell in the market. So we have a little bit of detail on that, and I really appreciate those questions. Thank you for those. And I encourage you to take a look at the study for more, but that's a couple of examples of what we heard.
And what I will do now is, having noted all these questions, we're going to do 2 things. We have some folks who are going to be giving some perspectives on the study. And I believe that talking with Malish and talking with Angie, which we're going to do now, just for 5 minutes each really, is going to allow us to answer some of these questions and get their perspective. And I'd like you to bring these questions, as we mentioned before, into the breakout rooms, because that's going to be really your opportunity to sort of think through and talk through some of this. And then finally, our study authors and the other folks who are on this call have agreed to take these questions and give them some considered thought and write some responses. So for most of the questions, don't stop asking questions, because this really helps all of us understand where are our heads on this? You know, where are the key things we need to know more about? And so Katie and the team at CARE are very willing to take these questions and answer them going forward. But so we can preserve our breakout room time together, I want to move us forward to just some commentary. I'd like to invite Malish to take the microphone and give us just sort of a 5-minute perspective on, and this was one of the questions that Florence, sorry, not Florence asked, but Mauro asked, and some others have asked as well, about what does this mean for your programming? And that's also something we're going to talk about in the breakout room. So Malish, please take the mic, and we'd love to hear from South Sudan's perspective.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. I'm Malish John Peter, the Deputy Country Director for Programs with CARE International based in Juba. And I would like to first give thanks to Katie and the team for a very good work, an incredible piece of research that will help us as a country office and also as stakeholders in South Sudan to perhaps take the VSLA model to another step in terms of implementation. For us as CARE in South Sudan, this piece of work basically reconfirms the assumption that we had initially when we started implementing the ACT project in 2016, that looked at how economic opportunity could be a driver for local peace building, most importantly, improving household relationship and mitigating against gender-based violence, and also looking at intercommunal relationship between ethnic groups, and also to anchor in how local conflict resolution mechanisms can emanate from building relationship between people and among different communities. What we have seen so far is that when we invest in bringing people together, particularly young people and women, then the chances are pretty higher that they will build informal relationship and friendship that then will be a critical driver for a neighborhood peace building that can then move into community level. One thing that we have learned from this study, and of course, other research work that has been done around VSLA, is that for the context like South Sudan that is prone to different kind of shocks, particularly intercommunal violence, and of recent now we have been faced with unprecedented level of climatic shocks like the flooding, it's increasingly difficult for informal groups like VSLAs to basically to thrive when the environment is not stable in terms of the overall community stability, but also it demonstrates that peace can be built from household level. We can be exposed to some of these shocks, but the most important thing is to look at from the household perspective, how relationship can be maintained to mitigate some of the violence that actually start at the household level between neighbors and escalates to even a larger violence that we have seen in some parts of South Sudan. And just to reflect back also into how this imply into the triple nexus, where we look at reconciliation, stabilization, and resilience, it means that reconciliation can actually be effected through the VSLA model. Because if we have women from different communities come together to basically share common understanding on what they want to do to improve their financial income as individuals and as households, then that helps them basically to a greater extent reconcile among themselves. And for me, that's an important lesson that as CARE South Sudan, we feel it's very important for us to continue with this VSLA model. What maybe I could say that is a missing link within the triple nexus, and I think this question came, how do we step up the VSLA model design to perhaps look into the stabilization element? Because the stabilization element is very important, not only for the household, but also for the community that the VSLA groups exist. And this is where we are looking at the institutionalization. How do we bring government to look at the VSLA model as a way to build peace and to resolve conflicts? And the issue of institutions become very important. For example, to adjudicate in case of any misunderstanding just within these groups or among members of communities, that we have mechanisms to address such kind of issues beyond actually the formal group norms and rules that they have, so that the trust that they build can be sustained. The other lesson that we have seen and maybe we need to take forward is the youth engagement. Yes, when we look at in South Sudan, maybe 95% of the violence across the country is perpetrated by youth. And today we have been faced by an unprecedented level of youth pressure groups that is mushrooming across the country as a result of lack of employment opportunities. And in this case, if we say that we invest more in bringing these youth together, give them some basic skills in terms of vocational skills, maybe in training, plumbing work, building, and others, and connect them into VSLA groups where they can then have access to some income that they save among themselves, and also bring in the investment of other actors like the donors, like the government, to create that kind of mechanism that provide access to financing. We will really contribute a lot in terms of reducing violence and also building that social cohesion that we do not really see among different members of community. So just to wrap up, I will say that for the VSLA, in our view, we we look at it as an integrated model, not just within the food security and livelihood, but even beyond the food security and livelihood sector, looking at the impact on GBV response, for example, the gender-based violence incident that we have seen. Different research has indicated that at least more than 60% of the violence happen in the households. And some of these are connected to lack of basic needs in the household, like food, like education, health, and all these build frustration that at the end, couples can end up maybe physically assaulting each other or even psychosocially. So for us, we're looking at that integrated model that the VSLA can indeed impact on different sectors to ensure that we will then be more responsive to some of the issues that communities are faced in South Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malish. I think it is important for us to keep in mind that for many of us, and I think many of the questions, as I mentioned, are really around how do we do VSLAs in conflict? How do VSLAs work? How do VSLAs survive? How do they function internally? I think a lot of it is us keeping in mind that the VSLA model, right? I've been doing this for 20 years. The VSLA model has been around for 20 years too. It's an established, solid model that we take forward. But there is so much adaptation and change, and participants and their lives and needs change, and they can adapt and change with it. And when we look at a VSLA, we don't just see an economic engine, we also see a social engine. And I think that's one of the things that Malish was really bringing forward when he was talking about the nexus and that relationship, is there is much more going on within the VSLA than just that economic piece. Thank you so much, Malish. I'm really glad to hear from the country program about how this study and these findings have affected the way you're thinking about practice on the ground. That's incredibly useful. One of the things I'd like to do now is invite Angie, or Angeline Munzara, who is the global, whenever I hear people say they're the global lead, I say, oh boy, I'm so sorry. The global lead of Livelihoods for World Vision International. But the nice part about being global is you have a wide perspective. And Angie certainly has that. So I'd like to invite Angie, who is not with CARE, to sort of give some external perspective on what the learning and what this study means a little bit to them, and what their perspective is. Angie, just, a brief 5 minutes. We're not gonna, we have the breakout rooms coming up, but if you just want to share with us your thoughts, we'd welcome them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you so much, CARE and your partners, for inviting me to share some perspectives from World Vision around the study findings. When I started providing leadership on savings groups for World Vision, that is 5 years ago, I used to think that implementing savings groups as a standalone is just a bullet magic to achieve social cohesion and strengthening household income in any context. Well, I was wrong in my thinking. Yes, savings groups are great tools for informal safety nets for the most vulnerable communities, but in order to build sustainable resilience, there is need for sequencing of additional activities depending on the context of operation and intended outcomes of the project. So today I would like to speak into two findings from this research. Firstly, that strengthened personal agency has been especially important for women, allowing them to gain the tools and the skills to be able to participate in economic opportunities in their communities with self-confidence needed to trigger shifts in social norms. And this is true, and I've seen it in many World Vision programming, particularly in fragile contexts, from Sierra Leone, South Sudan, Somalia, and to Mali. For example, in Sierra Leone, during the Ebola outbreak response, I always speak of a benchmark success story of women economic empowerment, where savings group members supported their own members to participate in elections to break political barriers. As some of you might be aware that Sierra Leone ranks number 150 out of 189 on the United Nations Gender Inequality Index. In 2018 elections, 52% of the registered voters were actually women, yet they only held 12.7% of seats in the parliament. This is stunning, right? However, the magic of savings group shifted this trend when women came together to save and utilize their social fund. They organized other activities such as pay to watch football matches, dances to mobilize money for the campaigns. And one of the member of parliament named Josephine McHugh, who is one of the savings group members who rose through the ranks, had this to say in her own words, validating the importance of building social cohesion, particularly amongst women. I believe every woman desires to have a right to make life choices and be in a position to fund those dreams. Savings groups provide an opportunity for women to develop self-confidence and to be independent. Women who participate in savings group have more control over household income. So this is what she says. And when I go to South Sudan, we hear similar stories of women economic empowerment and social cohesion. And such is the story of a 35-year-old woman called Ya participating in one of our food security and resilience and transitioning environments implemented with the partners and funded by the European Union. Before joining a saving group, she was jobless. She used to cultivate a small piece of land near her house, but the harvest was not enough to feed her family. But ever since she joined the saving group, her life transformed, and she happily shares, "I'm doing fine with my tea making business, which I started in March 2019 from the money I borrowed from the saving group. Now my 4 children can go to school. I have enough food at home for my family." Oh, these are beautiful stories of transformation orchestrated by savings groups, right? However, does that mean that savings groups are the only attributes to success? Now let me address the second finding from this research, which I find valid, that village saving and lending associations do not seem to reduce conflicts and improve peace building in silos, particularly in conflict contexts. They must work in tandem with other approaches and be aligned with contextual factors. I cannot agree more with this finding. This is true. Even with our projects in this context, we realize that without peace, markets cannot function. When markets do not function, there is no improved income. And in addition, without addressing the underlying drivers of vulnerabilities, it is a challenge to succeed with just establishing savings groups. Taking you back to South Sudan, I shared a beautiful story of Ya, but the project not only established savings groups, but also facilitated trainings on business management to embark on becoming entrepreneurs, and also recognizing the challenge of conflict as a hindrance to engage in market systems. The project also established youth groups to promote peace-building activities. And this is what one youth participating in the project had to say: "There is reason to work for peace. Our history is marred by conflict, causing us not to progress. Many cattle have been stolen from us. Many lives were lost due to revenge attacks. I hope the neighboring communities will get the same training too." So yes, there's glory for savings groups, but there are other peace-building initiatives which have been layered onto the project for the groups to be successful. In Mali, for example, conflicts between pastoralists and agronomists has been a challenge due to recurrent droughts caused by overgrazing and cutting down of trees. And to address that root cause, World Vision supported tree planting activities, efficient cook stoves, and marketing garden production through savings groups. So the savings groups became an entry point, which brought the wives of farmers and herders in collaborating, who in turn then brought their husbands together in mutual respect. And one beneficiary called Makan said, "We have the farmer managed natural regeneration, which is your tree planting, anti-erosion measures, crop management, improved soil, liquid fertilizer production for the development of our communities. But importantly, we have gained instruments to restore sustainable peace between agriculture and livestock." So you can clearly see the layering of other additional activities on top of savings groups in order to build community resilience. After having taken you through our experience, in conclusion, in Sierra Leone, South Sudan, and Mali, it is evident that savings groups are a good entry point. They are a solid foundation, but they are not an end in itself. To build resilience, savings groups are a necessity, but we need to be aware that they cannot achieve this as a standalone. Layering of other activities to address the underlying causes of vulnerability is key to achieve success using savings groups as a bedrock. And I conclude by taking you to Somalia. Maybe most of you know about the 2018 positive deviance study that was done. Why are some households more resilient than others? It actually found out that those who belonged to a serving group had better food security and well-being outcomes than those who did not belong to a serving group. So belonging to a serving group and participating in preparedness and early warning activities were also the key factors for success. So these are just my few interventions looking at the two key findings from the research, validating what they actually found out from the study. Yes, savings groups are great, but we need to think beyond to address the underlying causes of the problem that we are seeking to solve, and think through what are those additional layers that we can embed upon savings groups in order to bring forth long-lasting change in those communities. So thank you so much, Sarah and CARE, for inviting me to share these few thoughts from my side.
Thank you so much, Angie. So every time I listen to Angie, I get more inspired. I say, oh, I might come and say, oh, okay. So I hope you all have a similar reaction to Angie. I certainly do. What I'd like to do, and on that note, thank you, Angie, for coming here, and thank you as a representative for World Vision for taking the time to read through the research and, take the study and think about it. As a practitioner for many years, those of you who know me that I came up from the field, right? That's where I came from to this position. And my perspective will always be a field perspective. And one of the things that I even to this day as a senior advisor struggle with is time to read the research and time to reflect on the research. And so one of the things that I think these kinds of events can help us with is reminding us that as we learn, we need to reflect that learning back on the work we do. And we need to share it with others that it matters for. And so that's what I'd like to bring us to now. So now that Angie and Malish and Katie have really shared their perspectives, it's time for us to start sharing our perspectives with each other. There have been a considerable number of questions from Florence, from Mauro, from Mark, from Sarah and Samira, and others, and some great commentary as well in our chat box. We're going to go into breakout rooms now, and our friends at KPSRL are going to break us into the breakout rooms, and we're going to use these Jamboards. So in your chat box, you see it's popped up, there's a link. This is your chance to really write down your thoughts and write down your feelings and share your experiences, because we can't take this forward without everybody's thought, okay? So let's get into the breakout rooms as quick as we can, because we don't have that much time. We will have a French-speaking breakout room, which is fantastic. So for our French speakers who have been struggling along in English, you are now going to be unleashed with your own expressive freedom to speak your own language, which is always a pleasure. So we'll have one French room and 2 English rooms, I believe. And, oh, 4. No, we'll have 4 rooms. It says 4 rooms. So we will have facilitators in those rooms. We will have Jamboards with questions to answer. Please feel free to type your answers in. You don't have to wait for someone to call on you. You don't have to wait for a time to speak. Go right ahead, use that Jamboard and put your thoughts in there on those questions. So Melissa, I'd like to ask you to put us into our breakout rooms, and remember to accept as you've been assigned. And we'll all come back for our closing at the end. I'll see you in the breakout room. It will take a few minutes for us to get where we're going. So I'll talk over our assignment. Just to remind you that this is your time to share your thoughts. So please absolutely make sure that you type your thoughts in. We have a few people who have been thinking about this for a while in the breakout room, so they'll have a lot to say, and that's great. But we may also really leave space for people who are just starting to think about it, and think about it in your own work.
So sorry, everyone, this will take just a moment. For some reason, the assignments are not going, so I'm manually just putting people in breakout rooms.
All right, we are getting there. We're all coming along. We'll all be assigned momentarily. And as you are putting this together, keep in mind that this is ongoing research. So a lot of your thoughts and thinking here are going to allow CARE and others thinking about VSLAs in emergencies, VSLAs in the Nexus programming, your thoughts in the breakout rooms are going to allow people to direct the next research questions, figure out the next papers, figure out the next points they want to make. So put your thoughts in this breakout room. As we come back, CARE is going to share with us what all of this information is going to lead to and what your thoughts in the breakout room can do. So please feel free to make sure that you are.
Hi, Clovis. I'm trying to get you into breakout room 2. So sorry about this.
No, that's fine. No problem.
Munawar, are you there? Do you have a preference for which room you'd like to be in, if you'd like it to take place in English or French? Hi, Kennedy. I can see you're here in the main plenary. Is there a specific breakout group that you want to be in, an English speaking or a French speaking one? I'm happy to assign you to one of the breakout rooms.
There, now I'm not muted. Welcome back, everybody. Are we all back? I can't quite see if everybody's back, but I think we have all mostly come back. Fantastic. And because so many of you were in your breakout groups, now you have your videos on. Hi, everyone. Look there's all the people. Hi, people.
We were not done, but somehow the system just returned us to the main group itself.
But in fact, Killian, you were done, because unfortunately, as much as we always say, oh no, how will we fill our breakout room time? Then all of a sudden, our breakout room time is finished. So we always have more to discuss. And there's always more time, but we have to respect other people's second meetings. We have 3 minutes left to wrap up if we're going to end on time, which is shocking, but true. So the one thing I will say is this has definitely showed us, I've looked through the Jamboards. So many of the Jamboards are really full. There's a lot of discussion going on. There's a lot of thinking going on around this. What this session has shown me is we have a long way to go and a lot more to learn. And so I think there's value in continuing this thinking and work.
Unfortunately, I was.
So what I'd like to ask, just so we can wrap up on time, I know people have other responsibilities to get to after this session. So what I'd like to ask is if we can get ourselves muted again. You don't have to turn off your video, but let's get ourselves muted again. And I'd like to invite Berlinda from CARE, who helped organize both the study and the session, to talk us through a little bit about what we're going to do with all of this discussion we have from the breakout rooms, what we're going to do with all of this really interesting thinking and questioning that was happening in the Jamboards. There's a lot of richness there, as well as the questions that are going to be answered from the chat, giving you guys the opportunity to hear from Katie and the team about those questions. So Berlinda, I'd like to hand it over to you. We may go maybe 2 or 3 minutes over in our closing. So I hope you can stay with us just to close us out to hear what the upshot of all of this will be.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sarah, and also all of the other speakers today for this really rich findings and also rich discussion, albeit short. And I just want to thank all of you also for contributing very actively during the discussions. At least in my group, we were really getting going. Yeah, first of all, I'd like to ask that you, if you can, please access the Jamboard again after this call and finish uploading some of your ideas there, because I think some of you had just gotten used to how to write the sticky notes and it's not completed yet. So if you wouldn't mind, please do so, because we really will be looking at those Jamboards afterwards and using those findings. So first of all, just on the follow-up of this session, we will be sending around the recording, obviously. We will also be publishing the study officially on our website. It's not on our website yet, but we will do so very soon, and sending you a link to that as well so that you can access the learning brief afterwards. Then we also hope to use the findings of this session to write a blog, which will also be published on our website, and we will make sure that you can access that too. And then finally, yeah, we will be hopefully staying in touch with this group. I think this is a wonderful way to connect, especially for those of you who are ARC grantees or in some way involved in the ARC program. Through KPSRL, we are of course a knowledge community in itself, and so of course also the end of this programming, of this type of programming is coming just around the corner, and so we hope to have some involvement around that, led by of course the ministry and the knowledge platform. And I just want to thank you all for your time and for your effort this afternoon. Sarah, in particular, thank you for leading us through for everything, and Katie for all of your work in the last months. And then finally, of course, a special thanks to the South Sudan team and yeah, just all the work you put into this study and you're still putting into the ARC program. a big applause for you guys in the field who are really going through also some hard times there. Thank you very much, everyone, and I'll hope you hear from us soon with all of these follow-up initiatives. Thank you very much, and have a lovely day.